Good morning, Yorkshire Classic Cars Limited fans and hopefully Triumph fans. Quick rundown today. I'm going to do you a quick buyer's guide on the Triumph GT6 Mark III. Hope you enjoy it. So I know you at the other end of the camera and you're saying, why not a Mark 1 or 2? They're a much prettier car and they're much more valuable. That's true. I think the Mark 1 and 2 are very, very pretty cars. Oh, it's partly true. The Mark 3 is probably the cheapest and probably the least desirable of all the GT6s at the moment. And therefore, it's more affordable. And in some ways, in my opinion, more practical. Now, I don't have a Mark 1 or 2 in the workshop. So I can't compare against, but I will say they are a slightly smaller appearing car than the Mark III. The Mark III here is a more practical car. If, like me, well, I'm 50. I'm not a young fella. I'm not particularly overweight. Well, not overweight at all. But this is a better car for getting in and out of. A Mark 1 or a Mark 2 has a ginormous steering wheel, if it has the original wheel fitted, and they are very tight inside. The actual cabin is based on the same chassis as the Mark 1 and 2 and the Spitfire and everything like that. However, the actual chassis itself, the actual cabin itself, the tub, we do refer to them as a tub, is much, much smaller, okay? So therefore, everything's a little tighter inside and it's a little more difficult if you want to, say, for example, take the gearbox out, which you have to do through the car. Hence why I'm doing the Mark III. They're also more available. And in my, for what it's worth, humble opinion, and I appreciate beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but I actually think these are one of the prettier versions. I said in my weekly update that they considered it a poor man's E-Type, and I think that undersells the car significantly. I think the car is beautiful. I don't think it was an E-Type copy, but I will tell you a car that was copied off it, in my, for what it's worth, humble opinion, for the legal reasons. But if you look at a Nissan 240Z, that looks like a backstreet encounter between a GT6 Mark III and probably an MGB. But there we are, that's just what I'm saying. But if you look at the shape of the rear window here, Nissan 240Z, Datsun 240Z, definitely. That's where they lifted a lot of their ideas from. Right, anyway, so I'll get into it and I'll show you a few of the things to look at, a few of the things to consider. Off we go. So, to those of you that don't know, the underpinnings of a GT6, any GT6 actually, not just the Mark III, is the same as a Triumph Spitfire. Okay, so the differential, or the rear suspension, or the front suspension, the chassis itself, they are a separate chassis car. They are a unibody car. They have a chassis and tub and bonnet put on top of it. Strong little chassis, actually, very lightweight, very, very lightweight. Actually, two people can lift one easily with the suspension on. The only major differences are the tub, obviously had a hard roof. No Spitfire had a hard roof. The 6-cylinder engine, 2-litre 6-cylinder engine. And of course, the bonnet had the power bulge in the middle. Okay, so the bulge here is just on a Triumph GT6 bonnet. Now, if you look at that and you're thinking, well, I've got a Triumph Spitfire, that bonnet would look absolutely fab on my car. Yes, you can purchase one and put it on. It fits exactly the same. It has all the same mountings. And it does interchange. If you're looking at your Spitfire and thinking, well, I really like the idea of that 2-litre engine, that straight 6, because, you know, it's got to have a lot more go than my little 1300 or 1500, then yes, that will also fit, although you will need the transmission to go with it. It's the same layout completely. It all fits. They are interchangeable. As I say, the only thing is, then you've got a GT6 with, you will need the bonnet. The bulge is there to clear the rocker box cover at the front here. As you can see, they sloped it all down to allow that to fit under the bonnet. But you will then have a convertible GT6, which, you know, should have probably been a factory option, but they never did it. Now, I prefer the hard top personally, but again, it's horses for courses, whatever you prefer. It doesn't mean I'm right and you're wrong. I just prefer, or you're right and I'm wrong, in fact, but it just means I prefer a hard top. Okie doke. So what to look for if you're thinking of buying a GT6? So to start off, the first and most fundamental thing, I've said this in many videos, but it's absolutely true, with this, a Ford, a Fiat, a Renault, whatever you're looking at from the 1970s, this car is a L-Reg, so 71, 72, is body condition. Now, it's entirely restorable as a GT6. There are some parts you can't get. The first thing you can't get are rear wings. Okay, you can get a Spitfire rear wing. They fit exactly the same. They go in the same slot. However, they do not have the petrol flap in the side of the car. As you can see, it uses a petrol cap, which is, well, it's a Stag one, basically. It's the same shape and design as a Stag. So what you have to do there, if you're doing this for yourself or if your garage is doing it, is you have to cut this section from the old wing and let it into a new wing. Now, I've got one I can show you that. Six I've got in here is a work in progress. It's a car I finished the restoration on from Yorkshire Triumphs, and it's been awaiting paint for a significant time, but unfortunately it's been put off. But as you can see, that section has been let into the panel. It's welded in and around the rear, and it's butt welded together, and then there's just a very slight smear of filler to blend it in. But that is actually a Spitfire wing that's been adapted to fit a GT6. Now, things may change. If the Mark III GT6 suddenly becomes worth its weight in gold, I'm sure someone out there, Heritage, will start making those panels, but currently it's unavailable. Now, the next part on a GT6 you need to consider for rust and rot is here, across the front of the hard top. This is very, very, very prone on every GT6, actually, not just Mark IIIs, to rot. And it's very difficult to repair. Now, that one looks okay, actually. There's some paint flakiness on it, but this car has been stood 35 years, apparently, so it's kind of inevitable. The other one in the corner is also very good. It's had a little bit of work there. This section at the front is like a rolled section that presses on, and it should still resemble that, which this does. As you can see here, you can see the detail. Okay? But the roof front is very, very difficult to repair. Everything else is very reasonably easy, okay? You know, things like the bulkhead, the sills, all that stuff is available and quite easy to do if you know what you're doing. The sills and doors I'll come back to. Bonnets are available, absolutely, 100%. I think the one on the red one over yonder, which was brand new, that was, I think, £1,800. Now, if you're feeling up to it, you can buy wing sections. I know Rimmers sell these Heritage panels, other places like Fitchett's and that will as well. However, you've got to factor in, if you're paying someone, the chap originally with the red GT6 in the corner said, well, I can get all these panels and they're only like 400 quid. And I said, yeah, but by the time I've cut those off, planished it, repaired it and put it all back on, it's probably going to cost you a lot more than that in time. So if you're doing it yourself, obviously that's an option. If you're not, or if you just want a nice fitting brand new panel, then they are available. Next body part unique to GT6s that is different to a Spitfire is the window on the door. You'll notice here they have a quarter light. Spitfires don't have that at all. So you need to make sure that's in good condition because you're going to need it again. Now, I'm going to actually have to admit that I can't remember if the doors are the same or not. I believe they are. I think that, in fact, yeah, they are definitely, actually. I'm thinking while I'm thinking about it, you can fit the quarter light to a Spitfire door. So if your doors are bad and you get Spitfire doors, they should fit. The next place to look at, body-wise, if it's been restored, your car, check the tailgate. Tailgates are unavailable. They appear as available on some sites. It may have changed since I last looked for one. You need a good fit on the tailgate. They rust across here, right the way across that bottom edge. It's obviously a moisture trap. And again, difficult piece to repair. If I show you the one on the other car, you can see here the bottom edge is rusted out. Now, there is a company offering these as replacements, and they were offering them for, I think, £150. So what I suggested to this chap was, although I said it would cost me a fortune, cost him a fortune, and me in time, a long time to repair all that. I said, so you've two choices. I can either have a go at repairing this, or I can simply put filler in there for the time being. And then when it's painted, should one then become available, you can then have it sprayed and fitted and just swap it over. And he said, I might go with that. We'll see. I said, we'll see how the availability goes. A lot of this stopped during the pandemic, so everything was different then. everything changed. And of course, a lot of things are made in China and the places like that. So they became difficult and difficult to get. In the meantime, they may be available again now. And when it does go for paint, you may just buy a new one. He did buy one off someone who'd repaired it all, and it didn't fit this car. Now, it went and he sold that to somebody else and it fit fine, but it didn't fit this car. So we know this one fits at the very least. Now I can, as I say, I can slice that and cut it all out across there in sections, but again, expensive and difficult repair. So tailgates are important. As I mentioned previously, the chassis is the same on a GT6 as a Spitfire. Okay, if you're going for originality and show qualityness, the chassis should be painted body colour. It should match the body. Now then, what I did with the red one was, and this was the owner's choice, okay, we sprayed it gloss black, okay, we had it blasted, I repaired it all, and then we etch primed and sprayed it 2K black, and then we sprayed the uprights here body colour. And I rather like that, I have to say. I'll just show you that. Oh, please excuse the dust. It's been sat a fair old while waiting to go for paint. But as you can see there, these are done the red to match the car, and the chassis is done black. The chassis has had a new front cross section on here. So this part has been done here. That's quite a common rot area to look at. It's had new boxes on for the bonnet. The bonnet boxes rot like anything. And it's had these here. Okay, these outriggers here, these diagonals, they rust quite badly. It's also had these put on here. So these outriggers here, again, these tend to suffer a lot of damage rather than rust. They do rust away, but they also get damaged when people are jacking up or hitting curbs and things like that as they sit quite low. They are important. Obviously, you can see that's had all that done. Now, these corners here, again, check these. These are another thing that rusts away quite profusely. You can get fiberglass versions of these to prevent that, but they do literally fit like a sock on a chicken's lip. They're awful. If you can get good original items or even a good aftermarket item, it should line up with the bumper. It should line up with the bonnet. So, you know, see what you can get there. But again, check for those. So yeah, check the bonnet. Bonnet is expensive to repair, or you can put an alternative on, which is, they are quite expensive to buy, but it does make a very, very nice job. As you can see, that's been a new bonnet. There's no repair work been done under there. Okay, the replacement bonnets come with all these frames in and the hinge bars there. You will have to tweak them. You do have to make them fit, and it is not a 10-minute job. It takes me a day or two. And I'm used to doing it. So if it's going to take you, you know, if you've never done it before, it's going to take you a fair old while. But yeah, check the condition of the chassis, check for straightness, check it looks okay, check that it's not covered in chunky patches. Doors rust, but not profusely. Rear wings, again, should be good. And mainly of all, check across that roof there. Okay, you can see the paint has peeled slightly here on this car. It's not bad, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not rotten or anything. It's just a paint reaction by the look of it. So, having talked about the body, okay, we shall talk about the engine. The engine is the 2-litre straight 6 Triumph engine. Points ignition, okay, 25D distributor. For some reason, this one's had a metering unit adapter pedestal put in there from a TR6. So this may actually even be a 2.5 litre engine. If it is a 2.5 litre engine, it won't look any different. The 2 litre engine, this is one of my all-time favourite engines. It's smooth, it's silky, it goes really well. That engine, standard in a Spitfire body or in this, will go really, really well. It'll keep up with modern traffic. You're going to have to spend a lot of money on your 4-cylinder engines to make it keep up with this. I have heard people in the past say it ruins the handling, it's too heavy, it's a boat anchor, it's sat too far forward. Not in my experience. I'm not a racing driver, but in my experience, it drives absolutely fine. You can't tell any difference, in my opinion. I mean, there will be some difference, and I guess if you're on the ragged edge, maybe you could tell, but not me. I think they're beautiful. They're one of my favourite little engines. They go on really nicely. They work nicely. Bags of torque, bags of go. My ex-boss and friend Peter built one. It had a mild camshaft in it, a 6-into-1 manifold like this has got, and SuCabs like this has once had fitted, and some other little bits and pieces put on it, and that thing pulled like a train. It really went really well. Oh, it had a custom cylinder head as well, parted head. But I thought it was great. Now, things to look for on the engine. Obviously, you may get some tappet noise. That's kind of one of those things. Personally, I would advise against an aluminium rocker cover on a GT6. They tend to catch on the bonnet, in which case then you have to do weird modifications to the rocker box cover or weird modifications to the bonnet to make it fit. I appreciate it's aesthetically more pleasing potentially than the steel one, but the steel one will always fit better. As you can see at the front, they're rather square. This one doesn't seem to catch, which worries me that the engine mounts have probably collapsed, but they probably haven't. But it's, yeah, it sits a little high there. They're fine for things like a Vitesse or a big saloon, but on a GT6 tend to catch a little bit. Your straight 6 melee coil here, I don't know if you can see where I'm pointing, between where the cylinder head joins the block here, about where the engine number is. If it does, don't worry. They all seem to do that eventually. If you rebuild the engine, it'll be fine for a couple of months and then it'll start leaking there. They all seem to do it. I've no idea why. Fitted new gaskets, rebuilt the engines, and they're fine. And then a few months later, there's just a weep of oil. It's not running out. It's not gushing. It's just a moisture of oil there. This car has had a spin-on oil conversion there, and it's also had an oil cooler fitted. Those are both aftermarket. They're not standard. The brackets on there are standard. They are the proper Triumph GT6 ones that put the alternator right out of here. That's where it should be. Okay, to do that, you need this entire bracket, and if it's up here somewhere, it's wrong. It also has a different radiator to a Spitfire. If you ever looked at a Spitfire, it has a wide, low-down radiator. These are quite a thick, stood-up radiator. Obviously, they had to change that for the length of the engine because the Spitfire rad mounts further back in its own little housing. These cool very well. I've never really known, unless the engine had problems. So, for example, it was too lean. For example, the ignition was too far retarded. Then they don't tend to run hot. Not in my experience. If the engine is absolutely worn out, it'll run hot. So if you're looking at a car and it's got massive fans on it, you know, extra coolers, bigger rads, then potentially they've either made it safe or it's already worn out. Now, it's not an expensive engine to rebuild, but you still have to factor in. It's going to be £2,000 or £3,000 if you've got to pay somebody, I would suggest, by the time you're finished, okay, including labour, parts, machining, and that sort of thing. But when they're good, they're great. I do like these engines a lot. When they're bad, they're still a good engine, okay? Smooth, torquey. This is the engine they should have left in, well, should have put in the Stag, really, the 2.5 or the 2 litre, but they didn't. I think they're great. I can't enthuse about them enough. Next thing, as you can tell, I love GT6. I know quite a lot about them. Great engine, okay? Great looking car, in my opinion. The GT6 Mark III differs from the Mark IIs and the Mark Is. In the rear lights especially, the rear lamps on a Mark I and a Mark II are little tiny little rear lights. You'll notice also this one has an aftermarket exhaust system on. That's not standard. However, most will have an aftermarket exhaust system on by now. One other thing that you have in a GT6, I'll also draw your attention, actually, if I can get you in there. So, that piece of plastic there with the interior light on that's under the tailgate hinges. Can you see that? If that's in good condition, it's worth its weight in gold. If it isn't, you're going to struggle to find another. Okay, now then, looking at differences between a Spitfire and a GT6, as you can see, in a Spitfire, sorry, there's a bulkhead across here and the fuel tank sits here and the filler cap's behind the boot lid here. Big flat boot lid. This has a tailgate. Now then, I know you sat there thinking, wow, that's much more practical, but you literally, you know, you're going to struggle to get anything in there once it's shut. The section in front of the tailboard there, that section there is the same. Once you get from there forward, you're back to being a Spitfire. So the floors, the sills, all that sort of stuff. Under here is the fuel tank, okay, and the spare wheel. Aluminium tanks are available. They don't fit very well in my experience. They're ludicrously expensive. But that all goes in there under there. I'm not going to pull it all out. It's all neat and tidy in there. Okay. The interior. Now, these seats look correct for this car. More like a Spitfire seat with it being a Mark 3. A Mark 1 and a Mark 2 has more like a restore bucket seat. The dashboard is also very similar to a Spitfire. However, there are slight differences. Now, I'm not going to go through all the differences because some of them I can't even remember, quite honestly, and I don't have one here. But the switch clusters in the middle, as far as I remember, and I could be wrong, and if I am, by all means, comment. As I remember, this panel here is different, and these vents are different on a GT6 to a Spitfire. But this is definitely different in the middle here. The Spitfires all differed ever so slightly anyway. But that one's definitely different. The carpet sets are the same up to here. Obviously at the back they're different. Check that the headlining is in good condition. Okay. A difficult thing to change. When I worked at Yorkshire, we had a customer put a Webasto in a Mark II Spitfire, and it was absolutely beautiful, and they made their own headline and everything. And they did a fantastic job. It was not cheap. However, the job they did was beautiful. Now then, drawing your attention back to the sills here, I'm hoping you can see where I'm gesticulating to. Here there should be a seam in the sill. It's been filled over on this car. Don't be surprised if they are. Okay, but that should have a seam there. If I draw your attention to the doors, you can see there's a door gap here. Now that should be a nice consistent gap all the way around the door. Now the door is stood out a little here, which means the sill is slightly wrong on this car. But the door would actually pull in a little more maybe if you adjusted it. That gap is absolutely crucial. If your sills have been changed and or your rear wings, they're wrong if this gap doesn't exist. See so many people get the car, chop the sills off, stick some new ones on, take it off for paint, bring it back, put it on the chassis, and the doors overlap because they didn't set it all up correctly. I'm not going to talk you through the process because A, there isn't a lot of us that can do it right, and B, it's a long and drawn out process and really you need to see what I'm doing. But this gap is essential. If you've got a gap there, that's right. This one tapers off a little here. The wing could do to have been moved back slightly at the bottom here. So you can see where I'm pointing to. This gap here is perfect at the top. That's about the right gap. And it tapers off slightly. The doors should be right. Always make sure your doors fit right before you start faffing with your wings and stuff. Make sure your shell is bolted to your chassis correctly before you start. Make sure it's all square and everything. Like most things in life, and I do stand by this, the longer it takes to do it right, the better. Because if you do it wrong, there's no real way of fixing it, and it'll take you longer to try and cover a bodge than it will to do it right, if that makes sense. So to try and now fix this after the car's been painted is now impossible without damaging the paint again at least. I have fixes for this. If your doors overlap here, I can repair it. It will require some paint, but I can do it, and I know how to do it, and no, I'm not telling you how to do it. Okay? So further to that, the gap at the bonnet, and I pointed to this the other day, should be a nice parallel gap here. Okay, it should be around 15 millimeters. So this sill technically probably needed to go forward a bit. I suspect they've welded up the seam at the back too tight. So this sill could have done to have come forward a bit. That gap should be slightly bigger. Sometimes you have to cut and modify these panels. They don't come ready out the box just to fit whatever you pay for them. This section here, it comes to like a point on the corner. That's right. That should line up with your arch on your bonnet, which I'm pointing to but not moving the camera so you can't see me anyway. And this is correct here with the infill. This is nice. They've stitch welded across the top by the look of it, which they shouldn't have done. That should be spot welded all the way. Okay. However, I'm not going to criticise that. The rest of the job is very nicely done. It is not an easy job to fit sills on a Spitfire or a GT6. And these have been done very well, so I'm certainly not criticising the car. It's an expensive job to do. You usually end up having to do the floors. I haven't looked at the floors. You can get entire floor sections. It does involve cutting the sills off, the floors off, obviously, to put new floors in. They look fairly original to me, so they look all right. I haven't had a close look, and you can't see on the camera probably, but they look all right to me. What I will say about floors is they are worth replacing. It's a big job, it's a tricky job, and it does require some expertise. However, what I will say is they make a nice job when they're finished. Don't just your attention now going on from the sill talk. You can see there the section on the front of the sill, that's correct. You can see there's been some repair work done on the bottom of the bulkhead there where that meets the floor, because this car's had new floors in. It hasn't had any filler work done at all as yet, as you can see. This has had a piece let in all the way across here where they rust across the top of the sill. You'll inevitably have to do that, and a piece here. Okay, once that's had a smear of filler on it, you won't see that again. You can just see the seam there as it runs through that hole there, because you can't get to grind in there very easily. Okay, but it will be ground back. It's had a section let in under the clutch and brake reservoirs. Okay, echoing off the bonnet. Hello. They tend to rust there quite profusely, mostly because it's all washed off with brake fluid all the time and it damages the paint. So another area to look at. So you can see if you look in that car, it's had floor sections put in all the way down, inner and outer sills and inner sills. There are 3 sills on a Spitfire or a GT6. They're the same sill. You can see the repair work that's been done down at the end. So you're on the Cary Grant. It's locked itself, but you can see the inner sills there from this side behind the alternator box. Okay, it is mucky and filthy, but it has been going off for paint about 18,000 times. On this car, I did have to repair here. Okay, around the bottom of here. Again, it's going to need a smear of filler in there, but it's had to have a section let in all the way down the window frame and new drip rails fitted. But they do have a habit of rusting here. Luckily, the front of the roof was very, very, very good. And although that's actually been prepared ready for paint in the past. So, modifications. As you know, I'm a big believer in keeping your car how you want it. So what I would say about modifications, some are better than others. Okay? Some are worth spending your money, in my for what it's worth, humble opinion. Some, not so much. Ones to look for and are of use. Electronic ignition. Okay, this car still has points. The reason I'm not going to start it up for you, well, I don't really start them up because they sound terrible on video, but the reason it's sat here, I had to tow this in at the weekend because the ignition has gone down on it. So I've ordered a lumination kit for it. There are several good quality electronic ignition kits, and all of them are worth fitting pretty much. Lumination are, in my opinion, one of the best. They just work. I have heard of failures, but, you know, like everything, if you fit enough, eventually you're going to have a failure. Somebody's built it, it was only human. You can get a 123 distributor with the adjustable advance curves. Now, I've struggled to set an advance curve on those before because it's not always clear as to what advance curve works with which engine. I think they're probably more use if you can have it rolling road tuned. But again, very good. I do like the ones that have the Bluetooth on them, so you can immobilize your car by Bluetooth, which I think is an excellent idea. This car has an oil cooler on it. You can see there the oil cooler thermostat. The oil cooler is mounted up under the sump, which I think is very vulnerable to damage, and it's not a modification I would consider worthwhile. If you're going to track day your car and knock the living heck out of it on a circuit, then probably worth having an oil cooler. I don't think I'd choose the location they've put this one in though. I'd probably have it in front of the radiator, safe. I know it makes a little more work, but it's safer there from damage. Big rads, alley rads. When I worked at Yorkshire Trams, we fitted an aluminium rad. Can't remember the company that made it. Beautifully made piece of kit, completely wrong. The brackets were in the wrong places, so we had to send it back. Now, I appreciate, like I say, people make mistakes. That's life. We all do it. And if you say you don't, well, I'm sorry, you're a narcissist. But the fact is, when it came back, it was appropriate. It fitted, it bolted in, and then the pipes came out all at the wrong angles. The top hose wouldn't fit. It still needed a lot of tweaking. And for what it cost, I can't remember exactly what it cost, but it was many hundreds. Then it didn't help that the courier launched it over the gate. But the other thing is, you know, there wasn't any damage from the courier. It just didn't fit very well, and it was a lot of money. You know, if you're spending a lot of money like that, I expect it to fit like Lego, and it didn't. I don't think it was worth it. I think if you can get a good rad, or if your standard rad is damaged, have it recarred, I think you're fine. Electric fans, now then, electric fans are a bit of a toss-up. I removed the fan from several of my engines, including my V8s, because you can't believe the amount of extra power it feels like if you take that crank-driven fan off. It's literally like about 30 horsepower on some cars. My BMW E30 with the 325 in it, the M20 engine, I locked the viscous fan on that, and it literally felt like I was driving around with the brakes on all the time. So in the end, I removed it and fitted an electric fan. Electric fans are fine. If you're going to fit an electric fan, don't do it because you're overheating. If you're overheating, something's wrong. You don't need the safety net of an electric fan either. That fan on the crank is driven constantly. It is literally attached to the crankshaft. If that stops, something else is desperately wrong. You shouldn't really need one. If your engine is in good condition and it's set up correctly, you definitely shouldn't need one. If you're going to take that fan off and put an electric fan on, then I'm all for it. But otherwise, I don't really think it's worth the money. You know, you're probably better spent getting your car set up. SuCabs. This car has SuCabs. This car has the original Zenith Strombergs. I prefer SUs. I'm not going to go into the logistics of Zenith. There's very little to go wrong in an SuCab. And in my experience, I'm not saying I know everything, but in my experience, having worked with Zenith Strombergs and SUs, you know, there's a float in here with a needle. Fuel comes in there. If the float doesn't stick, it won't ever leak fuel. It goes through the jet and the needle in there that controls the mixture. There's a piston in there that rises up and down to allow different airflow and mixture ratios. And there's a flap in there to let the fuel and the air through. Yeah, I said it. That's it. And in my experience, I've made good power with them. They are reliable. They don't break down very often. They just do what it says on the tin. Zeniths, in my experience, I've had much more problems with. You can make blooming good power with an SuCab. There are several variants available. There's larger, there's smaller. You can do what you like with them. Just check that, A, it's idling correctly. If it isn't, check that there isn't lift in here. I don't know if you can see where I'm pointing in here. If it's getting air in through there, you will never, ever, ever, ever get that carburetor to idle correctly, okay? You need to make sure they're balanced correctly. So when you start to open the throttles, both should open at the same time. You need to check here and here that they're both moving at the same time. That's all very, very fundamental stuff. Make sure that the dashpots have got oil in. Make sure that they're not stuck in here so you get wide open throttle when you need it. Air filters, not a big fan of these. The reason these are on probably is because the standard airbox is difficult to get. It's not very blingy, but they are quite important because I favour a K&N, but you can't put a big deep K&N on because it will catch on this metal section of the bonnet here. Okay, so you are quite limited to what you can put on. I mean, don't run them open card, whatever you do. You don't want to see anything with open cards because it will backfire and set fire to your car. Next thing you should be able to see under there is the tubular manifold. There's a 6x2x1, I would believe. 6x3x1, whatever it is. Nightmare to fit, ludicrously expensive, won't make a damn bit of difference, okay? If you are running a massive cam with hugely ported heads, carburetors the size of North Arizona, then maybe you'll glean a few horsepower from it. And, you know, you're doing lap days, your track days, you're racing it, you're hill climbing it, whatever. In which case, it's then worth the literal total nightmare job that it is to fit it in there, because it is tight in there to put that in there. I can't remember. I could be wrong, but I aren't even sure if it isn't an engine out job to fit a 6x1 in there. I could be totally wrong, so don't quote me on that. I would reckon on a standard engine like that, as lovely as it looks, over the cast iron manifold, you'd be lucky if you glean half a horsepower. Even if you have it rolling roaded, even if you have new needles put in. That draws me to the needles in the SUs. They have a mixture needle, there's an SuCab. It controls every part of the mixture during the driving cycle. You can't ring up and buy them. You can't say, I've got a 2-litre GT6, 137,000 miles on it, engine's just been rebuilt, absolutely bog stock, can you send me 2 needles? And they'll send you a couple and they'll be close, maybe, if you're lucky, but the chances are they won't be right. You're going to have them set up on a rolling road. Even if they came off a car like this, the mileage will be different, the wear will be different, you know, there'll be something different that will affect it. Something like this has only got a breather on one carb, like somebody's blocked one and put it to the other. That should go to both carbs and with a T-piece in. I'll alter that for this chap. I'm not bothered about doing that. I'll do that for him. But, you know, stuff like that will alter each carburettor. So it needs setting up by someone who actually knows what they're doing. I appreciate people who do carburetors getting thin on the ground, but they are still out there, okay? You know, I'm a big believer in polybushes, Super Pro polybushes. This car has coilovers on it. They're standard, okay? The springs need to be in good condition. If they sag, people tend to put spacers in here. Good quality shocks, uprateable shocks. I'm not a big fan of adjustable shocks, again, unless you're racing. I tend to find if you only ever adjust them once, and then if you ever do decide you need to adjust, you get them to what I mean is you get them to a place where you're happy, and that's it. So just buy an uprated shock. It'll be fine for the road. Bushings, as you know, I'm a big fan of Super Pros. They're not too hard. They don't shake your fillings out. They're a little bit tauter than standard, but it is only a minor tartness increase, and they last forever. And I think they are a really, really good thing. You get what you pay for. If you buy cheaper ones, and I've done it, they do tend to be made out of concrete. And you know, GT6 or Spitfire suspension isn't the strongest thing in the world. You don't want to break other stuff because you've over-uprated your bushes. You can go for too much of a good thing. In conclusion, you know, R3 GT6, hit or miss, win or fail. I think they're a win, personally. Obviously, again, that's just my opinion. I think one of these is fab. I think they go really well. I think if you put one against MGB GT, which were one of my very favourite cars back in the day, I would go for one of these. That's not just because I'm a Triumph fan. I think the engine's better. I think the balance is better. The only handling issue is the transverse leaf spring. But as you can see, this car's got a little bit of negative camber on there, so that's pretty much all right. And again, unless you're pushing it to the limit, you're probably never going to come across its weaknesses. They sound great. That six-cylinder engine is, you know, you're going into MGC territory, and then, you know, the price of an MGC is going to be significantly more than one of these. For what these cost, I think these are one of the most unsung classics at the moment. They're a great engine, they're a great car, they're a sports car, they're lovely. You get the full classic experience, and if it was my money and I had the money to burn on one of these at the minute, I would. I've seen them down around £7,000. What's that? 8,000–9,000 US. And I think for that you don't get much, quite honestly. You get a sort of a, you know, a second-hand Fiesta, and I think these are significantly prettier little car, and you can really enjoy using it. So yeah, I think you should buy one. Take a look at one, see what you think. For that sort of money, I think these are one of the best. Obviously, if you want a Mark 1 or a Mark 2, you're going to have to pay a lot more. A lot of the things on here cross across, but that's that. Anyway, I'm waffling, I'll shut up. Thanks a lot. Like, subscribe. Thanks for watching. Thank you to everyone who does.